I'm Sean O'Connor. I teach human biomechanics. That's ENS 306. And biomechanics is actually my field of research study. So biomechanics is the best word to describe the type of research I do. But what is biomechanics? Well, biomechanics, we're thinking about how forces created by muscles in the ground act on the body and change its motion. We think about the energy of gait, how much energy is used. And so those terms, forces, motions, energy, kind of make up key ideas of the research projects we work on. And those are, for me, related in a focus on thinking about limits to mobility in older adults. So we think older adults lose the ability to live their daily life and get around due to either loss of balance, loss of strength, or loss of ability to be physically active or cardiovascularly active. And so those three areas are where I'm really interested. And in particular, I'm interested in being able to sense those losses in mobility. So I'm interested in being able to sense, for example, limits to physical activity, and developing sensors that either we test in the lab or bring people into the lab, or sensors that in theory one day you could wear on your body to tell you whether those limits of mobility are changing as you age. And so one project we're working on is we'd like to be able to measure physical activity on a wearable, something that you can put on your body. And right now your choices for measuring physical activity are: one, to measure oxygen consumption, which we know is very accurate, but you're not going to wear a mask on your face all day. The other option is something like this. It's a Fitbit activity monitor. However, these are actually not very accurate. They don't give you a very good sense of how many calories you burn in a day. Why? Because the motion of your wrist is not really indicative of your whole body energy expenditure. So we're trying to develop something that you can wear on your chest that will measure cardiovascular parameters that will, in theory, give you an accurate sense of how many calories you burn a day, but on something that you can wear just throughout the day. So that's one project. The other area we're interested in is in limits of strength. So we want to be able to measure muscle force. The problem is right now, if we want to measure muscle strength, we can put you in an exercise machine and see how much force, for example, or torque you can generate about the knee, right? But we can't know anything about the individual muscles. If one muscle is damaged, we can't actually measure it individually. You can do that if you're willing to invasively stick something into the muscle. So we're interested in trying to do that non-invasively, and recent ultrasound technology, and this is an ultrasound machine that we use in the lab, can measure not muscle force directly, but it can measure muscle stiffness. And it kind of makes sense that stiffness is related to force, because as you contract your muscle, you just can feel it getting stiffer. And the way this works is it puts ultrasound waves into the tissue, into the muscle tissue, and then based on how fast those waves move, they can measure stiffness. And so we're doing experiments to see whether stiffness, as measured non-invasively through ultrasound, and muscle force relate to each other. We're doing that through a clinical ultrasound machine that's generally meant for measuring things that are changing very slowly, so maybe isometric contractions would be okay. And we're working on our own device in the lab to measure muscle contractions very quickly, so that we'd be able to get muscle force and muscle stiffness, in theory, hundreds of times a second, so that we can actually measure while someone's walking. And the third area I mentioned was limits to balance. We're interested in understanding better why older adults lose balance capability as they age. We know that really, once a person in an older age has that first fall, it's a huge health risk. We really like to be able to diagnose and catch people well before that first fall, so we can let them know that their balance is compromised and get them into some kind of balance training program. And so we're trying to use biomechanics to better understand loss of walking balance, and looking at how the actual biomechanics themselves change. We know a lot about how, let's say, vision or the vestibular system change with age through sensory experiments, but we don't know as much about how people use their biomechanics and how that changes, maybe gets worse with age. So that's what we do in this as our main focus. And how do we test people balance? Well, we have to make them off balance to see how they're balancing, what their coordination is. So what do? We have a person on this very large treadmill, which gives them room to stumble around and balance. And we have them wear this head-mounted display, which is conveying to them a virtual reality environment. So they're walking as they see it in a virtual hallway while on this treadmill. If they were to speed up on the treadmill, it would look like you were going faster in this virtual hallway. And once we get used to it, then we can give them this false visual sensation that they're falling off balance because the world suddenly is rotating around. So you feel off balance even though you're not, and then you start making corrective foot placements while you're walking, in order to balance against this perceived fall, and we measure that. And so some things we measure are where do you place your feet. We also put reflective markers on the body to measure where the joint angles are and where the body goes. We also put muscle sensors on certain muscles that we think are involved with the muscle coordination. And so we're trying to really understand the whole piece of how the biomechanics is changing from young, healthy to older adults, how the muscle coordination strategy is changing, all to develop the ability to have a diagnostic to detect people whether their balance is getting worse well in advance of that first fall.